Call the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. And it was good to hear the member for Bonner on these bills, which I don't support and Labor doesn't support, and I'm happy to make some remarks to that effect and in support of the second reading amendment moved by the member for Watson. That was a rare contribution to this debate. Yeah, it was. Labor people have come into the chamber for the last day and a half to talk about what is a very significant piece of legislation, because it doesn't create more secure work and fairer wages at a time when we need both of those things. That's what a responsible government would do, and this bill fails. It fails to create more secure work and fairer wages, and in fact it does the reverse. And it was interesting to hear the member for Bonner say a number of things. I mean, particularly to finish off with this sort of I don't know, unicorns and rainbow version of life, that this bill would, I think, help people to grow their careers and aspire to families and mortgages and various other things. And I'll just pick up some of the points that he mentioned. I mean, he talked about enabling people to get more hours. Well, how does this enable people to get more hours? It enables people to get more hours by allowing an employer to offer more hours on the basis that the worker isn't paid overtime. That's how it works. So an employer could say to somebody, you can work more hours if you like, on the basis that you don't receive overtime that you're currently entitled to. Now, of course, the worker may well say, well, I don't want to work those extra hours on that basis, or the employer may simply look for workers within their organisation that is prepared to do that. But what's the effect of that? It means that overtime people are currently entitled to isn't paid. Is that going to help someone grow their career or receive higher wages? No, it does exactly the reverse. They talk about the casual conversion. I mean, how does that work? First of all, the employer makes a decision at the outset that you are a casual. They effectively make that decision sort of unilaterally, and that's the way you will be for 12 months at least, irrespective of whether you work a regular pattern. Then at the end of that time, there's the opportunity for the employee to seek to be converted to permanent employment. But the employer can deny that request on the basis of reasonable grounds, which are not very well defined. They could simply mean that the employer doesn't think that that kind of work will exist in future, and therefore deny that request. Well, what does the worker, an insecure worker, a casual worker who can be terminated relatively easily, what kind of recourse do they have at that point in time? Well, they can't go off to arbitration. They would have to go to the federal court. How many casual employees in Australia, having made a request to be converted from casual to permanent employment and being told, no, I'm sorry, I can't go along with that, I have reasonable grounds that I'll keep to myself for not allowing you to make that conversion? How is a casual worker realistically going to trot off to the courts in order to have that remedied? It is just ridiculous. This government, in essence, and people listening to this at home should hold on to this fact that the government will get away with whatever it can get away with. That's a recurrent theme of the government, and they will certainly do that in the IR space when it comes to wages and working conditions. A pandemic ought to be the time at which we look at workplace conditions, employment, pay, and all of the other things that make up what has been Australia's approach to working life, and recognise some of the shortcomings that exist and recognise some of the new challenges like people in the gig economy. It's an opportunity to take hold of those things and make changes that are for the broad economic and social benefit of the community. But what the government will do in these circumstances, and they've done it before, is they'll take a time of crisis, they'll take a time of instability and use that as the basis to tilt the wheel further away from egalitarianism in this country, and they'll return to their old hobby horses. And we can see it in the way that this bill has arrived here, as the member for Bonner made quite a show of the consultation process. I mean, the government created or confected a set of meetings and discussions to make a show of how everyone was being engaged. You know, we don't want to have the adversarial approach of the past. We want to get employers and unions together in the same room. But at the end of the day, when the bill comes forward, the substance of the bill, as you would expect from this government, is heavily weighted towards the interests of big corporations and to large employers, and fails to pick up many of the concerns that the unions put forward. The intention of the government in terms of making work less secure and holding wages down was clear with respect to the Better Off Overall test. I mean, they wanted to get rid of the Better Off Overall test, that was clear. They then spent some time pretending that that wasn't what they were trying to do, pretending that that wasn't actually in the text of the bill. When that didn't work any longer, when people were actually holding the page from the bill up in front of them to say, this is the part of your legislation that gets rid of the Better Off Overall test, they finally decided that they would use that as some kind of sacrificial change that they could make to then claim that the rest of the bill ought to be supported because it didn't do some of those things in other ways, which of course it did. Speaker, we have to look at these changes in the broader context that we face, both just in Australia over the last 10 years, but certainly in Australia under the last 8 years of this government. The government has sought to undermine workers' pay and conditions at every turn, and they've been successful. They've been successful in undermining pay and conditions at every turn. They have presided over stagnant or falling real wages. That is a fact. Wages in Australia have fallen to an historic low as a share of national income. In fact, as a share of national income, wages have dropped below 50% for the first time since 1959. So for the first time in 61 years, wages as a share of national income has fallen below 50% as a result of the fact that real wages in the economy have been flat as a tack or falling in real terms under this government. We've seen a complete disconnection of wages from profit and productivity. Profit in parts of the economy has been really strong, and yet wages have not followed profit. Productivity in parts of the economy has been relatively strong, and yet wages have not followed those productivity gains. Exactly what we're told by the government, that when companies do well, workers benefit. When productivity gains are delivered, workers benefit. That's not what has happened under this government. And yet nobody will come in here and speak to this bill and explain those things. They're not matters of interpretation. You can't look at the fact that wages have fallen below 50% of the economy for the first time in 61 years and say that's a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of fact that the government should come into this place and account for. Those outcomes, falling real wages, are no accident. How do you create falling real wages? Well, you get rid of penalty rates. That's one thing. You stand by and you let penalty rates disappear for some of the lowest paid workers in Australia. You talk down minimum wage rises. You argue against minimum wage rises at every opportunity. You attack unions. You demonise and attack unions reputationally, and you restrict their ability to represent workers at every occasion. All of those things are designed to do and achieve lower wages for working Australians. So the fact that we've had 8 years of stagnant wages and that the wage share of the economy has fallen at a time when there have been productivity rises and profit rises is no accident. It's, as the former finance minister said, admitted, acknowledged, that's a design feature of the economic management of this government. And we've also seen a growth in insecure work. The government says that their all-day, everyday focus is on creating jobs. Well, we know through this pandemic, we know that 60% of the jobs created since May have been casual jobs. That was described by the Centre for Future Work as by far the biggest expansion of casual employment in Australia's history. And that's another ingredient in this government's recipe for low wages. Less secure work less secure work, people are not able to bargain. And members on that side, not all of them, but members on that side don't seem to understand that, because perhaps their experience hasn't allowed them to see that. Perhaps their experience has been one in which they are a price maker, not a price taker. That they are in the business or corporate world where they go in, they have a conversation with someone about what they would like to get paid, and everybody's basically around the table. Do you want to pay rise? You've done well, you should get a bonus. Well, that's fine if you're in that sort of circumstance. People that we're talking about, and that everyone in this place should be concerned about, that government should be concerned about, are the people at the bottom. They never have those negotiations. They get told what they'll get paid, and if they don't like it, they get moved on. That's the nature of casual employment, and it's grown under this government. And nothing that they're doing in this bill addresses that. In fact, as I've already said, there's a relatively hollow gesture in terms of casual conversion. There's an extension of the flexible work directions, which just enable more of that flexibility. Flexibility is the euphemism for insecurity. Flexibility means that workers have fewer rights, less security, less certainty, an inability to assert their own rights and their own interests. And what does that flow through to? Lower wages. Stagnant wages at best, falling real wages at worst. And that's what's happened over the last 8 years. Flexible work directions, the government said, well, we need them at the beginning of the pandemic so that JobKeeper can operate. And Labor was prepared to be constructive about that, because that made a certain amount of sense. Then, as the economy improved to some degree, and for some entities they came off JobKeeper, we were told, well, we need to extend those flexible work directions to enable those entities that are transitioning from JobKeeper. And we gave that some consideration. There's probably a bit of an argument for that. What does this bill do? This bill takes those flexible work directions and extends it out to every entity. Entities that never needed JobKeeper. Entities probably like Harvey Norman that have seen their profits go up 160%. They are now getting the benefit of flexible work directions. And what do those flexible work directions enable? They enable employers to treat employees in a high-handed way that undermines their security and undermines their ability to be paid properly. What else does the bill do? The bill undermines the role of unions. Unions will no longer be able to assist the Fair Work Commission in scrutinising non-union agreements that fall short of national standards. Why would you do that unless you've got a philosophical, deep-seated antipathy towards unions, which means, in turn, that you don't understand the fundamental power imbalance between an individual employee and an employer. I mean, if people can't hold on to that on that side of the house in modern Australia, where have we come to? It's a bedrock of our egalitarian way of life to recognise that an employee by themselves is in no position to have their interests properly respected and the value of their work reflected in an agreement by negotiation with someone who exists in such a stark position of power inequality. That's what collective bargaining is all about, and yet this government runs that down at every turn. So we can't accept this bill because it's essentially using the circumstances of a pandemic to turn the wheel further away from those who have least. And that is unconscionable. It's unconscionable at a time when we're trying to recover from a pandemic that you do a whole series of things that make life harder for casual employees, that make life harder for the unions that represent them, that make life harder for certain part-time employees. All of these things will only exacerbate what has been the record of this government. Stagnant wages at a time of rising profits and high productivity. Wages as a share of the national income at a 61-year low. And it's not just bad for Australians, particularly disadvantaged Australians, and for families. It's bad for the economy as a whole. And that's the self-defeating part of what happens when you get that let the market rip, law of the jungle, free market madness run wild. Our economy depends on consumption. It depends on people working hard, earning the just rewards for their labour, and then having the confidence to participate in the economy. And that doesn't happen when people are freaked out about losing their job, about seeing their economic position grow worse day by day, month by month, year by year. That's what this government is delivering for workers, for households and for our economy as a whole.